Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamed, Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation Anshe Emet, and joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed in New York City, and Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter, Day School of Long Island. Last week we did Parshat Zachor. It was the Parsha before Purim. Hope everybody had a good Purim. We are recording this today on day 171. 171. Jeremy, you have in the background, you have some posters of Chatufim, of the hostages. We'll put this up. We're thinking of them. We're thinking of Yahel, Naveh, Tal, and Adi Shoham.
I think only Tal is actually still.
Oh,
I think Tal is still in captivity, and of course we have
Kfir Bibas.
Bir Bibas.
Unbelievable. 171 days. It doesn't seem like it's going to be any sooner for their release. We pray fervently that they're shielded from the torture that they must be experiencing, that they be shielded of further torture. We, of course, are studying Torah in a way of finding comfort and orienting ourselves towards these weeks now. Since Purim, we're going towards Passover. This week is Shabbat Parah. We're not sure we're going to talk about the special portion of Parah, but we do want to talk for a moment or two about Parasha Tzav. This is the second Parsha in the book of Vayikra, which instead of focusing on in general on the whole structure of the sacrifices and worship in the Mishkan, now it's going to give us some very, very clear details, some more details, and it actually is directed first to the Kohanim. It's Tzav et Aharon vet banav lemor. So the parsha starts out by talking directly to Aaron and his sons, unlike the Vayikra, which is Moshe, to tell to the entire people of Israel. And he's talking at the beginning about Torah Ta'olah, which is the ritual of the burnt offering. And then once we read here, it says, Hi Ha'olah, this is the burnt offering, an offering that would be totally burnt, Al Mokdah, which is it is on the blazing hearth. That's the translation of Everett Fox, the hearth, that it would be in the center of the altar. It would be the place with the raging fire. You place the offering on the grating, which is the fire consuming it, all night until daybreak. Kol halayla ad haboker, ve'esh hamizbeach tukad bo, while the fire of the altar is kept blazing on it. So I want to start off by noting that the word mokdah has a little mem in it. And the reason why I'm noting this is because last week, when we started Vayikra, we noticed that the word Vayikra is a little aleph. So I went out and looked up the interpretations of all of these things and found a lovely book that has interpretations about little letters, big letters, etc. Sefer Katan v'Gadol, or Gadol v'Katan. Anyway, it gives a very interesting interpretation. I'm going to share this one with you. Basically, it says like this. When we have a large letter, the Ezohi Torah ha'olah lemala. What does it mean that the olah, the burnt offering, is rising upward? Hi ha'olah al mukta. This is the burnt offering on its hearth. And then it goes right into an analogy or a kind of parallel. Torah hanilmedet b'itlavut. When we have the study of Torah studied with great excitement, enthusiasm, bikodesh, it's on fire. Afapichen, mem shav mokta zera. But the mem is little. Lelamedcha, to teach us, shelo teha gachelet meroba al halava, should teach us that the coal should be more than the flame. Lahavat shalhevet bifnim, the flame should be inside, or haner mibachutz, and the something else coming out of you from outside. In other words, in other words, a person should have a certain kind of contained core of excitement. Hitlavut, there's the idea that there's a flame on the altar. And I guess it excited the Hasidic imagination in terms of this is hitlavut, this is the soul on fire. But there's something that should be contained like a coal. So I want to just think about this image here. Go ahead.
So I would, first of all, famously, he probably cribbed this statement from somebody else, but it's such a great statement. And having my kids having attended the Abraham Joshua Heschel School, this is inscribed on the doorway to the lower school, both in the old location and the current location. Above all else, Heschel said in his final interview, remember to build your life as though it were a work of art. Your whole life, your personality, that is your greatest artwork. It's not just survival, getting the food, getting out of the rain, trying to avoid the predators. It's building your life into a work of art. And one of the things that I love about Hasidic teachings, and not just Hasidic, because there are other kind of pietistic traditions in our long history of Am Yisrael and the Jewish people and the Jewish religion. But one of the things that I love about them is their ability to listen for poetic possibility. So you got a little letter. Who knows why it happened?
Right.
Whatever kind of accidental orthographic tradition, but they said, how can I render this in a way which produces the possibility of a poetic address to a listener who says, okay, I'm supposed to have a fire, and what could be more poetic than fire? Fire is an awesome poetic image for religious commitment, enthusiasm, or depth, or whatever. And I know I need to have fire, but don't be a show off, right? You should radiate out light, but the coal, the COAL, not the Hebrew word coal, the COAL should be bigger than the fire within, meaning that when people look at you, they don't necessarily need to see, big sparks. They need to see radiance, but that emerges from a kind of humility as well. And don't be such a show off. And I think that the challenges of living a religious life with integrity, and especially in our age, in the 21st century, when things don't happen unless they get X many likes, and things don't happen unless they post it on vids and whatever. It's a yetzer hara to think that my flame should be bigger than my coal. Au contraire, the coal holds the possibility of flames that you don't have to show off. Now
So
that's a way to build life as though a work of art.
indeed, indeed. I just want to, I'm reacting, I'm thinking of a line, I think it's from Letty Cotton Pogrebin, who I think during the years when Newsweek was doing the top 100 rabbis, whatever, there was a whole bunch of criticism, like, why Barry Chesler wasn't in the top 100 rabbis and why Elliot Malmit was
But
not.
they had 101.
Right. We didn't make it. We didn't make it. Okay. But she wrote something very beautiful, which is there are those who are lit from without, and there are those who are lit from within. I'd prefer to acknowledge those who are lit from within than those who are lit from without. I've thought about that a lot because, there are certainly in I'll say it in religious life, and it's true for every religion. There's charismatic leadership, and we all, we've been accused, all of us, of being, charismatic at one point or another. I could certainly turn it on like anybody else. Okay. But I know I'm turning it on, and I know that there has to be authenticity here. And so I'm relating to the gachelet here as trying to say, find your authentic self and find the place where you burn, find that burn, and understand that you can lose control over the flame. What when you close your eyes and imagine, let's say the mizbeach, this fire coming out of the hearth of a large flame pit, okay? And you're throwing an animal on it, and the animal's incinerated, probably very quickly because the fire is always on, and the fire is always being fed with fuel. Um, that's a very accessible metaphor for the soul. But he's saying here, you gotta keep the quiet burn. You gotta burn.
Yeah, I don't think that I'm not sure about the if it happens very quickly. Maybe it does. Um, it's not, I mean, not in favor of cremation, of course, in contemporary times, but those are enclosed ovens. These are not enclosed, they're open. Because keep the fire burning, kol halayla ad haboker,
So that's continued
all
on. That's
night.
what verse is that? Read on that.
Let me go to that. I lost it.
We're
I,
all
I got to open it back up again on the
so.
computer.
Verse 5. Vav esh ala mizbech tu kadbo, right? It means the fire on the altar is to be kept blazing upon it. Uvi'er aleh kohen etzim baboker
No,
baboker.
no, but you got to go back. Go back.
Okay,
The Cohen is you. This is our phrase, by the way. Eish tamid.
right?
Um, you have to keep it. That appears here in verse 6.
5.
Eish tamid zukadam lizbeach lo tichbeh. A perpetual fire should be kept on the altar. It should never. You have never let it go out. If that's not a phrase rich in poetic possibility for life and spirit, I don't know what is. Eish tamid zukadam lizbeach, as Matisyahu said. Eish Tamid, eternally, the fire burns continuously. But the verse 2, which actually refers to the animal, says, Hi ha'olah al mokdah. This is the entirely burnt offering, as opposed to other offerings which are eaten by the priests or eaten by the human beings who offer them. Hi ha'olah al mokdah, al mizbeach, kol halayla ad haboker. So it would seem to me that when you're cutting, and the whole animal, sorry for being a little bit graphic and specific here, with an olah, you slaughter the animal and then chop it into pieces. Okay, you that's here in where are we? Um,
That's in chapter 1.
you know, you cut it lin tacheha. Was
That's
that
in chapter 1.
Chapter 1. Okay, so you chop it into pieces and you put the pieces on the fire, which is an open flame. Maybe it doesn't go very quickly. Maybe it is, as you said, Elliot, the slow burn.
Yeah. So again, all of this is pointing back to fire and a metaphorical reading of fire. I just want to add one little point, which is, what is so interesting about the fire not going out, and that you should that there's such an insistence on keeping that fire burning. Of course, keep the fire burning it's a great expression, but it also says that the ignition of the fire, which is what is going to happen in next week's Parsha Shmini, right? When the whole system gets ignited by a flame from God, well, that fire is the perpetual fire. And so that fire can't go out, which means then that if you're, on day 3 and on day 33 and on year 33 and on year 333 and on and on and on for eternity, what you're burning on the fire has a kind of a vestige of the original fire. The fire that you are that is consuming your offering is part of the original fire. I think there's a very beautiful kind of teaching there, which is everything harkens back to an origin. And it's a human story also, because we have our genetic origins, we have our ancestry, and a lot of the traits that we have harken back to our ancestry. I'd like to blood clotting. I mean, that probably came by as a mutation somehow to get us to survive. When you gash yourself, the ability of blood to clot, and other things that have become part of our normal lives. They harken back to some kind of origin, a point of origin, and so the fire on the mizbeach has to harken back to an earlier fire. Go ahead, Barry.
So, well, I would like to add something a little bit differently, and that is what makes us human in part is our ability to tame fire. I think that is unique to human beings. Other animals have not mastered that. And there's a tension between the fire that is tamed and the fire that gets out of control. And this works both with the altar and, when you were speaking, it suddenly struck me, how was the temple destroyed? It was burned. It was destroyed by a fire that was out of control, which is the antithesis of the fire on the altar, which must always be within control.
Yeah.
And it's true of human beings as well. You mentioned Souls on Fire, which was the name of the late Elie Wiesel's book about Hasidism. And, part of the problem with all forms of leadership, but perhaps more so in Hasidut, is the person whose fire is out of control. The person who can burn too brightly and do a lot of damage, because leadership, along with other avenues of human endeavor, requires control and self-control. It can't be out of control.
There's a great there's a in Tractate Chagiga, which addresses it's about festival offerings, but it does also address. There's a short section in the second chapter about mystical stuff, and it says that Hillel had 70 students, and the lowest one was Yochanan ben Zakkai, and the Targum Yonatan ben Uziel, and the lowest ones, when the birds flew over their heads, the birds got scorched. And so the Kusker Rebbe has a great line on that. So the students ask him, if the lowest of the students, the birds flew over their heads, the birds got scorched, what about the greater of the students? He said the birds flew over their heads and did not get scorched.
Okay.
But they controlled that fire. Hey, listen, I want to read you something on the Rambam, which just addresses this point that we're talking about now. Mitzvata Seliot Eish Yekuda al Mizbeach Tamid is a positive commandment. This is in the Mishneh Torah, the daily offerings and festival offerings. It is a positive commandment to always keep the fire burning on the altar, as it says in our parsha. Eish Tamid Tukar al Mizbeach. The perpetual fire shall always be burning. And he says exactly the point that you were making a minute ago. Afal pisha ha'esh yarda min hashamayim. Though the initial offering, the initial fire was triggered from heaven, that is to say that God zapped it up, later on in Parshat Shmini. Even though that is the origin, and that is a contiguous connection with every subsequent fire, even though that started it, mitzvah lahavi eish min hahediot. It is also a commandment to bring from humble human sources. Shene'emar, this was in last week's parsha, as it is said, v'natnu bnei Aaron eish al mizbeach, and the children of Aaron should add fire to the altar. So that to me is a lovely rendering of the cooperative. Like, God does some miraculous stuff, but humans got to chop the wood. Humans gotta
In the
make
food,
sure
they gotta poke it and they gotta stoke it. They gotta
poke it and stoke it, because that's a religion of brit and covenant. God does God's part, we do our part.
All right, so let's switch gears here, because the next Torah here is Zot Torah Mincha. This is the instruction regarding the grain gift, or as Jacob Milgram says, the cereal offering. The cereal offering, that is to say, a grain gift or something that you bring with from the Post Cereal Company.
With milk and maybe some blueberries and
Breakfast of champions.
So I was reading this slowly on Shabbos afternoon. It says, "Ve'erim mimenu bekumtzo." There shall be set aside by the handful, misolet amincha mishamna, some of the flour of the grain gift and some of its oil. Vet kol alevona, with all the frankincense that is on the grain gift, asher ala mincha v'iktir mizbecha, and it is to be turned into smoke on the altar. And reich nichoach l'Adonai, a soothing savor to God. And I was trying to kind of picture in the waning hours of Shabbat, what does this mean? He takes and I'm trying to imagine, here I am, I'll make, either a cake or a muffin or whatever. And when I'm working really quickly, I'll take a scoop of flour from the flour container, and I'll throw it into a bowl, and I'll mix it up with oil or margarine or something and sugar, and I'll make a batter, and I'll throw it into the oven. And look, for me, it's a pleasing odor. I have a pleasing odor when I put this, take out a muffin from the toaster, and uh, and the point is that am I reading the text of these laws in order to recreate this as a recipe, or am I reading this as a memory, or am I trying to reconstruct a Judaism here only in imagination? And I say this because to me that it suggests a bigger problem, which is and here maybe we can focus for one moment on Pesach that's coming. Many of our viewers and listeners are already thinking about that, which is, there are a lot of rules in Pesach, a lot of rules about how to kosher, a lot of rules about what to do, what to buy, etc., kashrut, the whole thing. And there's one way to learn it. You can learn it from the internet. You can learn it from a code, a digest, a guide. The Rabbinical Assembly has its guide for Passover. The OU has a guide for Passover. Everybody has a guide for Passover. Even my shul has a little digest guide for Passover. And you could pick this up and you get the basic rules of Passover. Or you could learn this by watching someone, namely your parent or your grandparent. And I want to dip into this fascinating idea that there are different modalities for learning how to do something. One is by the book, and one is by imitation. I know that there's a lot of literature on this, and I'd like you to make reference to the argument of Chaim Soloveitchik. So Barry, I'm going to turn to you. Structure and
Okay, before we do that, though, I think it's important to consider what this chometz, the handful of the mincha offering, what its purpose was. And that was the part that was burned on the altar. Originally, the mincha was a presentation offering. It was something given to God by setting it on the table, such as the showbread, which will figure later in the Sefer Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. And Baruch Levine suggests that there are two elements of the grain sacrifice that were introduced in order to make it more like an animal sacrifice. One was burning the small portion because most of it is going to be eaten by the priests. And the second thing was the introduction of salt, which was part and parcel of the meat sacrifice because that's part of the process that makes the meat kosher. And so what we have in the mincha service, the mincha sacrifice is kind of a shift in the nature of the sacrifice itself. And so, when you were trying to figure out what you were doing when you're reading this, I think we're doing all of those things. We're looking to recreate, we're looking for meaning, we're looking to see what it, what happened historically, and all of that is part of Torah because that's part of the fire that we keep on the altar.
Right. But I'm not going to read Leviticus chapter 6 and go to my local shrine and burn up a handful of flour. I'm not going to do that ritual.
No, like the Rishner Rebbe, you're going to sit in your chair and tell the story.
And I'm going to tell the story about it, but then and here, so sacrifice is not going to be the medium here, but the Seder is going to be the medium, and my kitchen is going to be a medium, and going to the store and buying Passover food is the way to do this, and reading recipes in a cookbook. I'll get information from that, but
Elliot,
I'll give you an example. Wait a second. My daughter, God bless her, is now, Adina Sussman's assistant. Adina Sussman, great cookbook writer. Okay. So I got to test drive a recipe. I was so honored that I tested a recipe and I totally messed it up.
Was it edible?
No, I ate it. Okay. But I did something wrong in the steps of the recipe. I seared the tofu and whatever, it doesn't matter. My point is that I didn't watch anybody doing it. I read it from a book. I read it from the page.
All right, but before we get to that, there's one important point to make. So you mentioned Pesach, which now is I have to think about myself. And what's so fascinating in part is what do we call the book that we use? It's a Haggadah. It's the story. But what do most people talk about? What they had for dinner.
Yes.
So the story is lost in our sacred meal, as it were.
The
So
story, yeah, the story, the Haggadah is a Seder, like our prayer book is a Siddur. It's not what any contemporary American thinks of as a story, right? And that's for better or worse. If you know rabbinic literature, as the three of us are familiar with it, you get what's going on in a way that I think is much more difficult for your average person. Um, I just want to say one very terminological thing, which our listeners here might get or might not get. Mincha, grain offering, and the word that you are most likely to associate, our listeners are most likely to associate mincha with, means the afternoon prayer. What's going on? I just want to give a little bit of like a dictionary stuff to make this all a little bit more uh, uh, clear, a little clearer. The word mincha means a gift. All the sacrifices are kinds of gifts, but the word mincha as gift um, came to be associated with the grain or cereal offering as opposed to the other kinds. And Jacob Milgrom, the great scholar of the biblical sacrificial system, he wrote a multi-volume commentary on Leviticus, massive, massive tomes, multiple tomes, says that the word Ishe, like Ishe Ladonai or Ishe Yisrael, that word too doesn't, even though it sounds like Aish, the etymology of it is actually gift also. So how it is that the afternoon prayer service came to be called Mincha is its own interesting story, but the word simply means gift. And I think this is pretty interesting. As we, contemporary people, none of whom have ever seen, for thousands of years, the temple ritual, the temple cult, um, and we strive for, at least I do. Some people maybe throw up their hands and say, well, I don't really find this meaningful. I strive to find it meaningful. I even like in tefillah, I don't like cutting out the references to sacrifices in tefillah. I make those references, but what works for me as I daven them is to think in terms of gift.
Gift.
And yeah.
Right. Okay. So what I'm thinking about in reading this thing is, am I reading a cookbook? And how is information being conveyed to me? And I want to watch someone do that. And this is my longing here. And this in a sense triggers, the whole aspect of how a religion like ours is transmitted from generation to generation. And it seems that we have two valuable modalities that are both in they share something with each other. And they conflict with each other.
So
Uh,
you said a little bit earlier, you queued up the three of us, which our listeners may or may not know, about a 30-year-old article about contemporary Orthodox Judaism by the historian Chaim Soloveitchik. He's the son of the famous Rav Yasher Ber, J.B. Soloveitchik, and therefore the great grandson of the first Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, known as the Brisker Rav. Um, he's a historian at Yeshiva University and very, significant modern scholar of medieval Judaism and of the Talmud. And he wrote an article in the early 90s, which is a tremendous, tremendous article, tremendously insightful about contemporary life, and at least partly about the dislocation of uh, European Jewish community, not just European. First, if you think about this, the fact is that there are almost no Jews who live where their ancestors lived 150 years ago. Okay, the Islamic Jewish world, of course, has been utterly wiped away. The European Jewish world, of course, has been utterly wiped away. People have moved from Eastern or Central Europe to Western Europe to South America to North America to Australia, whatever, of course, to the land of Israel. The discontinuities, um, if 150 or 200 years or 300 years, or even in Soloveitchik's own personal memory, the way to learn how to do stuff was by watching your elders. And that was sundered by a lot of historical circumstances. And the process was also sundered by the total change in the role of books and literacy. 150 years ago, there were professional scholars, there were Talmidei Chachamim, but most people, like, if they knew how to read the Siddur, that was wonderful. If they knew how to read the Chumash, if they had Chumash with Rashi, that was wonderful. But there was no art scroll, and there was no Daf Yomi online. And instead of learning how to behave as a Jew from watching your elders, you had to learn how to do it from books, which he makes the fabulous in that article. He makes the fabulous turn of phrase. It's like learning how to tie your shoe from a book. You can't do it, or you can't do it well, and it's extremely difficult to read our Parsha of Tzav. But also, if you go back and look at the last week's, which also covers some of this same ground, you cannot learn how to do it. You can learn some important points. You can learn that it has to have salt, and that it has to have oil, and that you're supposed to break it into pieces. But you can't, like, I'll read you a little line from the let's see if I can find this, from the last week's Parsha. If your meal offering is a meal offering on a griddle, on a machavat, it shall be of choice flour, and will have oil mixed in and be unleavened. You shall break it into bits and pour oil on it. This is the meal offering. If your meal offering is in a marcheshet, in a, I guess, a deeper pan than a griddle, it should also be made of choice flour, and it shall be. You do not have enough information to know how to do this. You don't know what the pans look like. You don't know what style of the preparation it is. You need a person to show you these things.
Right, but we also have to keep in mind that the person who was encountering this text originally knew all the references. We coming afterwards do not. But what I wanted to do is suggest a different way of looking at this, perhaps. In Jewish law, there are two kinds of law books. There are Sefer Halachot, which are books of legal discussion, and Sefer Poskim, which are books of decided law. The cookbook is like Psak Halacha. It's like the decided law. There's no story in it. So if you don't get it, you're never going to get it. If someone can't show you when you're stuck, then it's not likely you're going to be able to make the recipe the way it was designed to be made. So cookbooks, I think, need stories. And I think the cookbooks that most of us gravitate to have more information in them than the recipe themselves.
I guess that's why Julia Child was, I guess that's why it's not only whatever the name of her famous cookbook was, French Cooking Made Easy, or whatever it was called, but it was the TV show that you had to have the
That
TV
was
show
it.
to come with.
Look, and the best cookbooks are the ones with the best pictures now, photographs. I mean, they sell the book. A beautifully shot book will entice the reader, entice the person in the bookstore to purchase this, because they have this moment of illusion that says, I think I can make that too. I think I'm good. I'm that good. It
So
honors me. It honors me.
I just want to tile this back with Pesach and try to rehabilitate my interpretation that the Haggadah is a book of narration. I mean, that's what Lahagid means, to tell, to narrate. And what it comes to remind us is that redemption is a story. It's not a moment in time, it's the passage of time. And we come to it at many different points along the way. And that is what gives life our fire and our enthusiasm.
It's a wonderful way to mark the passage of our time together. Our time is up. We've reached the conclusion of our little time together studying these very, very complicated, sometimes remote, but you can see they're not so remote. They speak to real yearnings in the soul. Both aspects here: the fire, and also how we transmit this.
I just want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to reinforce. First of all, this is the transmission, but all that is true, and how to do it, all that is true. One of the things that I love about Leviticus, I think Leviticus is fascinating, even though the specifics of the rituals are not the ones that we do. Ritual is like, it's art, it's theater, I think that Americans, this is classical Reform Judaism. Classical Reform Judaism just rolled its eyes. By classical, I mean, 19th and the first half of the 20th century. Reform Judaism said, in the phrase of Immanuel Kant, religion within the bounds of reason alone. It's about ideas, it's about social justice. It is not about hocus pocus, mumbo and jumbo. And with all due respect to our reform, forebears from early modern Europe, wrong. Actually, religion is art, and it needs some hocus and some pocus, and it needs some mumbo and some jumbo. The things that we enter into that produce a kind of awe and reverence that help us see that some things are deserving of reverence and attention to detail. We're talking about this in terms of cookbooks. I'm not being a chef myself, but like Julia Child, she was doing something extraordinary. She wasn't like frying an egg, And so these descriptions here in Vayikra, they are about pouring your attention and your devotion and your reverence into specific behaviors, through which sanctity is conveyed to a community.
Very nicely done.
Amen.
Nicely said, and that's a good way to wrap up our time. Well, first of all, we want to honor and thank the people watching and listening to us. We really, really appreciate your being here. Wishing everyone a good week, a good Shabbat, thinking of the hostages, thinking of Israel during this very, very challenging time. We hope that this study gives comfort, and we look forward to seeing you next week on the next edition of Parasha Talk.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye. Bye.